It's October, and you know what that means? Spoopy. And nothing else. Anyway, Castlevania to me is strange. I enjoyed the series, but never owned a physical copy of any of the original games other than Order of Ecclesia on DS and Castlevania the Adventure for the original Game Boy. And the one that I played the most is Symphony of the Night, since I bought it 3 different times digitally, but I never properly sat down and played through the original 8 and 16-bit games. And with the help of that Game Boy, who paid $6.79 for this collection, and then gifted to me, and then told me to play through each game in the collection. Today I'll be looking through the Steam, PS4, and Switch versions. Now, the Castlevania Anniversary Collection without a discount is $20. And even at $20, it's worth it. Seeing how a lot of these games tend to go for a lot more money just for the one, but the collection covers the original NES titles, Castlevania 1, 2, Simon's Quest, 3, Dracula's Curse, Super Castlevania 4, Castlevania the Adventure, Castlevania 2, Belmont's Revenge for the Game Boy, and Castlevania Bloodlines for the Sega Genesis. And Kid Dracula for the NES. Anyway, you also get the Japanese versions of the game, except for Simon's Quest for some reason. It was released in Japan, even though it was released for the disc system as well. Anyway, let's begin with the original Castlevania. But before I begin, let me change the Steam grid because Konami is lazy. Originally released in 1987 for the NES, Castlevania, and as Akuma's Dracula, which translated to Demon's Castle Dracula in Japan, it is challenging yet beatable with one of the most bullshit enemy placements, bullshit pattern, and brutal difficulty. But I really enjoyed my time playing it. Castlevania 1 has its issues, but how solid the gameplay is, with its simplicity, it's a fun yet difficult experience. There is a lot that has been said about Castlevania, so there isn't much I can add. Set in 1691, you play as Simon Conan Belmont, or Belmondo in Japan. As a descendant of the Belmont clan, you must travel through Dracula's evil castle, Castlevania, to fight and kill Dracula along with his minions like Medusa, Frankenstein's monster, and Death himself, with the final fight being Dracula. Control-wise is a simple game, using only 2 buttons, one to jump and the other one to attack. And you use your items with a combination of pressing up and B at the same time. The items you get to use to your advantage are a dagger, axe, and a clock that freezes time. Overall, Castlevania 1 is fun, yet difficult, and I can still recommend it. Now let's move on to Castlevania 2, Simon's Quest. Okay, let's get this out of the way first. Oh my god, Bloody Tears is an amazing song, and even with its 8-bit rendition, the song still holds up. Okay, moving on. So Castlevania 2, set in 1698, a couple years after Castlevania 1, you continue the Simon Belmont story by trying to find all the pieces of Dracula and kill him again. The game has the same basic gameplay as Castlevania 1, but has this pseudo-RPG system, with hearts used as currency and with experience points. And I can dig it. But it just isn't handled properly. You got towns to visit like in Zelda 2, but this time they're multi-story towns. Anyway, in these towns you can buy weapons and whip upgrades, restore your health, and talk to local townsfolk. Now there's an infamous day and night cycle, where the game pauses and tells you, what a horrible night to have a curse. Also, this is a banger song by the Black Dahlia Murder, which I highly recommend. And then the world changes to nighttime, where enemies roam in towns and there's nothing you can do about it other than to kill time. It gets rather tedious because you can't skip the text and you are forced to survive the night every time. There are these dungeons where you explore through it and find an orb to throw a stake through it. Sometimes there are bosses you can just walk through the room and ignore them. It's a mess. You level up, buy upgrades, kill enemies, die, rinse, and repeat. There's nothing much that can be said about the game before, and out of the NES trilogy, it's aged the worst. Mostly because it had potential, but it just wasn't done right. And overall, just kinda boring. Hell, even Dracula is an easy as hell boss to fight. Overall, Castlevania 2 just wasn't handled properly, and it suffered from bad sequel syndrome. Just stick to the soundtrack of this game and nothing else. Moving on to Castlevania 3. Castlevania 3, Dracula's Curse, returns to its roots by being a straight-up level-to-level platforming game like the original Castlevania. This time, it's a prequel, by playing as Trevor Belmont, or Ralph in the Japanese version, the second earliest Belmont, who plays like Simon in Castlevania 1. Set in 1476, you travel through the land on your way to defeat Dracula and its minions. Throughout the journey, there are forks in the road where along the way you can save some people and ask them to join you on your adventure. There are a total of 3 characters that can join you in your adventure, but you can only have one at a time. You have Grant Dynasty, who has a short dagger and can use the same sub-weapons as Trevor, but has the ability to climb walls and ceilings. He is the most agile and really fun to play. After that, you have Sypha, who uses some sort of wand to bonk people and uses powerful magic and is generally a glass cannon. And finally, you have Alucard, the son of Dracula and kind of the worst hitting party member. He has his dad's fireballs that can be upgraded 3 times, but does the least amount of damage. He can use the clock to stop time and change it to a bat and avoid enemies. Honestly, Alucard doesn't get cool until Symphony of the Night, but by God, he's absolutely useless in stairs and can't do anything. Because of having 3 extra characters, there are multiple endings, but the ending I went for was the one with the character I used the most, Sypha, because she did the most damage, and in canon, she gets with Trevor. That's it. And like Castlevania 1, this game is surprisingly difficult, but it's fun and challenging to complete. It's honestly the best of the 3. Now, the soundtrack of the game is great, from the song like The Beginning all the way to the Vampire Killer remix when you enter the castle. Now, I am going to talk about this a bit more later, but the Japanese version of Castlevania 3 uses a completely different soundtrack, with the songs sounding overall different there. Overall, Castlevania 3 is the best one of the NES trilogy, but 1 isn't bad either, and you can just ignore Castlevania 2. While I was editing this video, I went to my local record shop and found this. Yep, it's the Castlevania NES trilogy. They were all next to a game called The Challenge of the Dragon, which looked neat, but I ain't spending $100 on an NES game. But I did get the Castlevania trilogy from there, and are now safe in my possession. Don't worry, MS, wherever you are, they're in good hands. Now let's continue. Super Castlevania 4, or Akumajou Dracula in Japan, originally released in 1991 for the Super Nintendo. The game is kind of a retelling of the events of Castlevania 1 in a way. It depends on the localization, because in the original English localization, the game takes place after Castlevania 2 Simon's Quest, instead of 1961, like in the original Castlevania. To me, it's just another retelling of Castlevania 1. You play as Simon Belmont, the man whose bloodline is to kill the evil Lord Dracula again. Now, since it's kind of a remake of Castlevania 1, the whole game is styled after the gameplay of Castlevania 1. It still has its level-to-level platforming, but this time with a 6 to 8 way whip attack. Because of that, the whip in this game is kind of broken and overpowered, where in the older games you could only attack in front, but since this is a multi-directional attack, it makes a lot of enemies kind of easy, and more of an annoyance than an actual challenge. And for the first time in a Castlevania game, there's a dedicated sub-weapon button. In this case, since it's an SNES game, it's the R button. And overall, the game's control is tight and responsive. Rarely did I feel like I was fighting the control like in the original NES game. Anyway, you go through the levels, defeat bosses, and make your way through the end to fight Dracula, simple Castlevania style, same as the first one, but with more platform challenges like in Castlevania 3. And like in Castlevania 3, they go a bit overboard with the bullshit bottomless pits, especially near the end of the game. And speaking of near end game, the last stage is absolute hell. 3 straight difficult bosses, 2 of them who become early game bosses in Symphony of the Night, before you can fight Dracula, and it's one hell of an endurance run. But thankfully there's a secret area before the Dracula fight that'll fill your health and hearts up. Now there's one thing that the game does amazingly. Like at all Castlevania games, it's its music. To me, one of the big moments in the game is when the game is starting to load, and you hear a slow but familiar tune. Then you load up into the next stage, then Bloody Tears kicks in. And boy, does it sound great. Then the next stage, with Vampire Killer. And to end it all, the beginning from Castlevania 3. For the final stage of the game, it's rather fitting, and it fits really well for a final stage after playing the NES Castlevanias. And finally, you have the last song when you fight Dracula. You have this dramatic song after a rather fitting one for the Dracula fight. But then, Dracula is near his final health bars. The second phase starts. Silence. And it's the song from the first stage, Simon's theme. A fitting way to end this game. Overall, Super Castlevania 4 is both a fantastic Castlevania game and just a great game in general, with just a massive difficulty spike at the end, but I enjoyed it. And this game alone is worth the collection, honestly. A quick note, so this isn't the only Castlevania game on the Super Nintendo, the other being Castlevania Dracula X, but it isn't in the Anniversary Collection. So back to the Wii U Virtual Console depths you go. Well, maybe another day. Now let's get out of Nintendo territory and move on to the land of blast processing with Castlevania Bloodlines for the Sega Genesis. Castlevania Bloodlines, also known as Castlevania the New Generation in Europe, and known as Vampire Killer in Japan, released in 1994, a game that I have surprisingly amount of history with. I was personally raised as a Super Nintendo kid, so I avoided the Sega until the Dreamcast, but then I had a friend who had a Sega Genesis, and when I would go to his house, I would play this game constantly. Anyway, this Castlevania game is not based on the Belmont name, but its descendants. You play as John Morris, who wields the legendary Vampire Killer whip, and is the son of Quincy Morris from Bram Stoker's original novel. And then you have Eric Alucard, who uses the Alucard Spear, a special spear created by Alucard himself that he would later use in the Saturn version of Symphony of the Night. So that's neat. Taking place in the 19th century, 1917 to be exact, in this game, instead of going through the outskirts of Dracula's castle, this time you go through Europe. From the Atlantis Shrine in Greece, to the Leaning Tower of Pisa in Italy,
Buongiorno.
to a munitions factory in Germany, to the Versailles Palace in France, and finally, the Castle Proserpina in England, where Elizabeth Bartley, who is trying to resurrect Dracula, is currently residing. You go through the same stages no matter what character you pick, so go for it. But in some stages, you go in different directions. With John, since he has the Vampire Killer, he has some of the same moves as Simon from Super Castlevania 4, except with a bit more limited movement. He can still whip in many directions, but only when midair. He can whip swing in any ceiling instead of having a specific wall ring to hang on, but John can only swing and not just hold unlike Simon. Eric, on the other hand, can't swing on ceilings, but he can do a super jump straight from Super Mario Bros. 2. You hold down, wait until the charge, and then press jump. Unlike John, Eric doesn't need to jump attack diagonally. He can do it from the ground, and only from the ground. And like every other Castlevania game from this time, you have sub-weapons. 3 in this case, the Battle Axe, the Holy Water, and the Bladed Boomerang, that both John and Eric can use. Each character eventually will get a power-up to their weapons, whether it'll be a Flame Whip for John or a Blazing Spear for Eric, and each come with its own specific sub-weapon. With John having the Water Dragon, a mystical orb that homes in enemies and attacks it, while Eric has the Thunderbolt Spear, where a horde of lightning bolts go full screen and hit enemies around you. I will say though, this game likes its mini-bosses, like, a lot. Like, they bought the enemy health bar, and they're going to use the enemy health bar. And stages overall just seem more difficult than the other games. But that just might be me from playing Castlevania 4 right before this. Once you beat the game, it tells you to try Expert Mode. And all it does, after you beat Expert Mode, gives you an extra cutscene that's not really worth it. And yeah, I'll pass. You get a nice little bonus ending, but it's just one more cutscene, so you can just YouTube it. So there's no real reason to go for it, unless you like the challenge. Now there's something I want to talk about until I talk about the Japanese versions of the games, but Castlevania Bloodlines is censored in Europe, and has some graphical changes when it went outside of Japan. I just wanted to mention that, and I'll go more in depth at a later time. And finally, let's talk music. Castlevania Bloodlines is composed by Michiru Yamane, sorry if I pronounce it wrong, who will later do the soundtrack for Symphony of the Night, and it shows because Bloodline has an amazing soundtrack. It does have a bit of that Genesis twang, but overall it's really good, even the secret classic tunes. And speaking of classic tunes, the big moment to me in the game is right after you defeat Elizabeth Bartley, and you hear the theme of Simon from Castlevania 4. But this time it's a bit slower paced, and it's like the end of a journey across Europe. It's fantastic. Like Super Castlevania 4, Bloodlines is a fantastic game with great music and gameplay, and it's not the end of the Morris and Alucard legacy. The game does have a sequel in a way with Portrait of Ruin, where you play as John Morris' son, Jonathan Morris. I personally haven't played it yet, but maybe one day. Overall, Castlevania Bloodlines I find is a must-play Castlevania, and it's a great addition to the Anniversary Collection. Anyway, like stated before, at the time I only owned 2 Castlevania games. Castlevania the Adventure was one of them. And at the time, I've never played it. Now that I have, I don't like it. And I'll get into it. But first, known as Dracula Densatsu, translated to The Legend of Dracula, released in 1989 for the original Game Boy, and one of the 3 Castlevania games released for the original Game Boy. Released before Castlevania 3's Dracula's Curse, but taking place after Dracula's Curse in 1576. You play as Christopher Belmont, who is out to kill Dracula. Standard Castlevania stuff. So Chris here is a really bad Belmont. Like Belmont's, he carries the Vampire Killer Whip, and nothing else. Yep, no sub-weapon in this game, but the whip can be upgraded 3 times, to the chain whip, and to the chain whip with a fireball. And that's it. And again, unlike the other Belmonts, he loses anytime he gets hit. So get hit twice, and back to the regular whip you go. It does piss poor damage. And man, Chris walks fucking slow. Like, I get it, the whole Belmont strand stuff, but man, this time it feels way more slower than before. And man, Chris's jumps feels really gimped. I really don't like how this game feels, and it feels like it has a fetish for ropes. And man, fuck the auto-scrolling level. And I get it, it's a Game Boy game, and I can give it some slack to a point, but this game still hasn't aged well. And another thing that hasn't aged well is the music of this game. Blasphemy, I know, for a Castlevania game, but hear me out. It just isn't that good. I will say this though, playing this on the collection is neat since it has some filters. You have your basic monochrome filter, both filled height and perfect pixel, that look like when you're playing on a regular Game Boy Advance SP. And then you have it again, but this time with a Super Game Boy filter, so that's neat. And it has a scaline filter for some reason, but whatever, some people like that. But the one that I use is the dot matrix setting, since it's based off the original Game Boy screen. And playing this on the Switch is pretty neat. It's the closest thing to a Game Boy emulator we had on the system so far. And looking at it from my original Game Boy, it's pretty close. But yeah, playing this on the original hardware doesn't make the game any better. It's still pretty bad, and I don't like it. But what I do like, it's its remake on the Wii. Yeah, I'm going to talk about it since I own it, so might as well. Castlevania the Adventure Rebirth is a complete remake of Castlevania the Adventure, released in 2009 for WiiWare, RIP Wii Shop channel. If you're going to play a version of Castlevania the Adventure, play this one, either with a hacked Wii or Dolphin, where you can play it at a higher resolution, which makes the sprites look super crisp compared to the Wii U. And you can use your original Wiimotes too. It's smoother, looks nicer, and has a proper soundtrack, and I can't recommend it enough. And what's crazy about it, they added sub-weapons in this game, so yeah, way better. So play it on Dolphin because the game hasn't been re-released ever since. Maybe one day, we'll see. But back to the non-Rebirth version of this game. Overall, I don't like it. That's it. I just don't like it. Moving on to the direct sequel of this game, Castlevania 2, Belmont's Revenge. So the second of the three Castlevania games on Game Boy, sorry Castlevania Legends, I'm sure they could have fit you in the compilation, but whatever, maybe for another time. Anyway, Castlevania 2 Belmont's Revenge, not to be confused with Castlevania 2 Simon's Quest. This is the game that Castlevania the Adventure should have been. Belmont's Revenge is leagues way better than Castlevania the Adventure. My god. Anyway, getting a bit ahead of myself. Released in 1991 as Dracula Densatsu 2, translated to The Legend of Dracula 2, released for the original Game Boy. Taking place 15 years after the adventure, where Christopher Belmont's son, Soleil, however you pronounce that, has been corrupted by the power of Dracula. Now Chris has to save his son and stop Dracula once again. You go to 4 different castles a la Mega Man style: Crystal Castle, Rock Castle, Plant Castle, and Cloud Castle, with the final castle being, of course, Dracula's Castle, where you're fated to fight your son and slap him out of Dracula's control. Control-wise, it's similar to Castlevania the Adventure. It seems they went even further with the rope fetish. At least now it's tolerable since you can now attack when you're on the rope, so that's an improvement. And the music in this game is actually pretty alright. Has a neat effect after you go through a door and you're near a boss battle, so that's pretty cool. I can't really say much of the game since a lot of the stuff have been said in past Castlevania games, other than it's a massive improvement over Castlevania the Adventure, and it's a shame that this didn't get the Rebirth treatment, because it's really good for a Game Boy game, and I can really recommend it. I still have no idea how Castlevania Legends is on the Game Boy, but maybe one day, but not today, because next up is Kid Dracula. So, Kid Dracula, originally released in Japan as Akumaju Special, Boku Dracula-kun, translated to Demon's Castle Special, I'm Kid Dracula, released in 1990 for the original Famicom. This, in a way, was released in America for the Game Boy, but that version is a hodgepodge of a sequel and a remake of the Famicom game. This, however, is an official translation of the game that was released with the Anniversary Collection. This is not your run-of-the-mill Castlevania. Actually, this is much more closer to Contra than Castlevania. You'll see what I mean. You play as the titular Kid Dracula, who is the son of Dracula, so Alucard, but he calls himself Kid Dracula, who just woke up from a slumber and is out to defeat Galamoth, this weird dragon thing that appears in Symphony of the Night later. Anyway, you go stage to stage, with each stage having a boss fight at the end of it, or in some cases, a quiz battle with Lady Liberty herself. Kid Dracula can shoot projectiles in 4 directions, get abilities and special projectiles after each stage. The main weapons you can use is by holding the B button. You have your normal fireball, you have your homing projectile fireballs, an ice projectile that freaks his enemies, and you have a bomb that explodes and lingers for a bit. For abilities, you have the power of the bat, which can turn you into a bat, but touch anything or get hurt and you'll be turned back to normal. You have the power of up, up, down, down, which is the anti-gravity move, so you can walk up on ceilings. It's pretty simple in concept, but some of the levels gets pretty challenging platforming-wise, but I managed to finish it in one setting. At the end of each level, you're able to choose the path so you can play a minigame, where you can spend the medals you collect from enemies so you can get extra lives. You have roulette, where you gamble the medals into extra lives. Can, where you guess what color they're hiding underneath their skirts. Sounds kid-friendly. Garapon, where you spin this barrel and hope a marble colored in anything but white drops. And finally, you have Jab and Bop. It's just Pop-Up Pirate. Overall, it's a fun little game and a neat addition to the collection. I can definitely recommend it. Kid Dracula himself has appeared in other media, like just recently in Super Smash Bros. Ultimate, where he's a spirit, and his shadow appears in the Dracula stage, so that's pretty neat. Now let's do a quick wrap-up of the Japanese versions available in the collection, so I can move on with my life. Alright, so Castlevania 1, other than the title screen, there is now an easy mode where you get 9 lives, you start off with 30 hearts instead of 5, and the biggest thing is that you don't get pushed back when damaged. So that's pretty cool. Castlevania 2 Simon's Quest gets nothing in the collection, but the Japanese version of Bloody Tears is played on the title screen, so that's something. Castlevania 3, the whole soundtrack was different due to a whole different sound chip used in the Japanese version. Take a listen. Other than the music, there are tons of edited sprites, like these rabbits becoming Fleamen in the US version. I'll put a link to the cutting room floor if you all want to see. Super Castlevania 4. You can tell from the intro screen that they censored it. They also changed the HUD for some reason, and the whip sound effects is also changed for a reason. Castlevania the Adventurer. Still sucks. Moving on. Castlevania 2 Belmont's Revenge. The biggest change is the Holy Cross became the axe in the American version. Other than that, nothing much has changed. Castlevania Bloodlines. First, one of the big differences is that in Vampire Killer, Eric's face looks a bit more anime, and the localization team found it a bit feminine, so they changed it to what the international version is now. Okay, so I'm going to cheat a bit and use an emulator for this one. So let's begin. Castlevania the New Generation. It's censored. Corpses removed, blood effects gone, it's pretty neuter to the core, but the game is still itself, and it's very playable still. And finally, we have Kid Dracula. It's still Kid Dracula, with the only change being the title screen. Neat. And with that, I'm done with the Castlevania Anniversary Collection. Can I recommend it? If it goes on sale, yeah, go for it. It's a great compilation of great Castlevania games and Castlevania the Adventure. Anyway, I've been Fonzie. Follow me on Twitter at Fonzie's Revenge. Watch me live on Twitch at twitch.tv/FonzMan. And I'll see you next time on whatever I decide what's next. Bye.